Is the vibe in Ravenloft changing? Welcome back to Above the Table, a new channel where we discuss the various wonders of the gaming industry with a special focus on TTRPGs, which is why you're here today to listen to me talk to you about Dungeons & Dragons for the next 5 or so minutes and lament about back in my day, Ravenloft used to be. I'm just kidding. Kind of. Anyway, Penguin Random House recently announced a new Dungeons & Dragons book where a party of adventurers are set to take on the horrors of Ravenloft once again. Only judging by the cover art for the 2025 release, what Ravenloft has to offer this party may not actually be so horrifying after all. The description for Ravenloft Heir of Strahd begins, 5 strangers armed with steel and magic awaken in a mist-shrouded land with no memory of how they arrived. The description continues to introduce potential readers to the protagonists, including an orc, a drow, a tiefling, a kenku, and a human. And it certainly makes sense to see Dungeons & Dragons lean into character choices that have been popular with 5e players. The description continues on to read, after they barely survive a nightmarish welcome to the realm of Barovia, a carriage arrives bearing an invitation. The description does include the written copy of the invitation from Strahd, which much more elegantly invites the 5 strangers to Castle Ravenloft to accept his hospitality and dine with him, as he is eager to make the acquaintance of the visitors Barovia so rarely gets. These 5 strangers are showcased in the cover art for the novel, and to have awoken with no memory in a realm as harsh and, as they apparently find out quickly, unwelcoming as Barovia, the party members certainly seem optimistic in the imagery provided for them, with hopeful expressions covering their faces, particularly the quote-unquote sunny human. It just feels out of place for a realm like Barovia. It's historically been one of the more consistently dark and horror-filled parts of Dungeons & Dragons, with gothic fantasy fans finding many different surprises lurking in the fog or around a corner to scare them and get their heart rate up in a fairly unique way within D&D as a whole. To put it simply, this cover doesn't seem to match the historic vibe set by previous Dungeons & Dragons releases that includes Ravenloft, Vampires of the Mist, and the deliciously complex Curse of Strahd. And I think that will work against the novel for others, not just me. For myself and anyone out there who may be listening to this and already agreeing with me, those who adore Ravenloft and Strahd because the gothic horror aspects and the complexity of a character who is completely and utterly consumed by their own corruption, seeing the vibe here be so drastically different from what we'd expect initially just doesn't inspire any strong desires to read this specific release. Anyway, circling back to the description, it wraps up with what you can probably guess comes next. Ultimately, the 5 strangers want to find their way home, and they don't really see another alternative, and they accept the summons to appear at Castle Ravenloft, where they are forced to survive the twisted enigmas of Strahd and his haunted home. One of the sentences included in this particular part of the description is, "All is not well at Castle Ravenloft," and that's honestly one of the most iconic understatements ever, and I kind of adore this sentence as a description for Strahd's home. But something about Strahd himself, both in the cover art for the book and him in the description, just seems off. Again, this continues that unfortunate feeling of the vibe not feeling quite right here. Historically, imagery showcasing artwork of Strahd has inspired fear, dread, and an overall sense of unease. Here, he certainly does look the type to be extending an invitation to a meal, only I'm not so sure I'd be particularly intimidated by this version of Strahd if he is who I was met with upon answering my summons, although anyone who knows me knows that I would accept a summons from Strahd anytime, anywhere. I know, I need to focus back and circle to what really matters and what we're really talking about, the Heir of Strahd. Everyone says don't judge a book by its cover, and please know that I am still going to try to remain optimistic despite the trepidation I feel initially, and I'm ultimately still going to read through Heir of Strahd as soon as I can. That said, I think it can also be healthy to maintain that cautious optimism in certain instances, and for me personally, this is definitely one of those cases. I'll also maintain that if we weren't meant to judge a book by its cover, there would be no cover art or descriptions to judge. Ultimately, it's the cover that should make a potential reader decide they can't wait to be turning the pages of this particular adventure. What is on the cover that does help me maintain this cautious optimism that I'm choosing to carry with me going forward is that Ravenloft Heir of Strahd is written by New York Times bestselling author Delilah S. Dawson. And I have read previous works of hers that I immensely enjoyed due to her ability to effectively communicate a clear grasp on tragedy. If this trend is continued in Heir of Strahd, the book could end up finding its way to the correct tone in its 320-page run, and the heroic optimism showcased on the cover may soon be replaced by despair as Ravenloft attempts to swallow its latest victims whole. Do you plan to read Heir of Strahd for yourself when it releases next April? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons if you want to see more content like this in the future from Above the Table.